I have just noticed that this button is hanging on by a thread. I blame you. This fit fine before I became to be your pastor. James was born a child of the sea. To borrow a line from Paul Simon, his father was a fisherman, his mother was a fisherman's friend, and he was born in the boredom and the chowder. His neck was beginning to get leathery, days on the deck of a boat before Coppertone, hands hard and dirty. He spent every evening cleaning fish. The birds circled the remains and squawked. The salt air was the only air he knew. And he washed off every night before he went home, but it didn't matter much, because he still took the smell of the sea and the fish and the salt home with him. One evening, when he got back, he was cleaning fish. He was standing next to his longtime friend Sid. They had grown up together. They're cleaning and talking when one of the other guys from across the dock yelled over at Sid and James and said, "Are you guys taking off tomorrow or not?" "What?" "Well, haven't you heard? The miracle worker's going to be in town, the man from Nazareth. They say he's going to be teaching here at the docks tomorrow. We're taking off." "Well, I don't know. Somebody else joined in, shouted into the conversation as they kept working and said, "I heard he's staying at Simon's house tonight and that he'll be here early in the morning." Well, the next morning, Sid got up and decided he needed the money. He'd go back to sea. But James took the day off, as did most of the folks in town. He took the day off, went down what he thought was early to the lake, to the docks, but it wasn't early enough. I mean, the crowd was already there. I think everybody in town except Sid had taken off and invited friends. They'd come to hear this guy out, to see what he stood for, what he was all about. Buzz had been all over the community that he not only taught, but healed the sick. When James got there, he couldn't even make out which one was the guest until he saw somebody get on Simon's boat and push out into the water. And there, just a few feet out from shore, he recognized that this is the one teaching, the one whose voice is bouncing across the water to the gathered crowd. And man, could he teach. As big as the crowd was, they were absolutely stunned and still. And when the teaching was over, James was invited onto Simon's boat to meet the guest. And then there was still plenty of daylight. They decided to go fishing after all. They fished and fished and fished and caught nothing. And then the guest said to Simon Peter, "Why don't you throw your net on the other side?" The guy was a carpenter, for crying out loud. What does he know about? But they did. They threw their net on the other side, and James saw, he couldn't believe it. It was the biggest catch of fish he had ever seen, and he knew this guy was different. And that night, James couldn't sleep, because the miracle worker had invited those guys on the boat to stop what they were doing and follow him, to go with him on his traveling preaching show. And James tossed and turned and tossed and turned and finally got up and paced. He didn't know what to do. Fishing's all he knows. All of his community knows what's expected and how life is ordered. You get up, you eat a bite, you head to the docks. You load supplies, you repair nets, you jockey and banter with your buddies who are doing the same thing, you go back and catch fish. When you get back, you clean the fish with your friends, you keep a few of them for yourself, you sell the others, you start to build a business. Maybe one day you'll own your own boat. If you're really successful, maybe you will own 3. But that's what you do. You grow the business, get a bigger take. but you stay home and you build a business and you marry a local girl who knows your folks and who has a good recipe for fish stew and who likes kids. That's just what you do. It's the script. It's what is supposed to be. And he paces and paces and then says to himself, but the man from Nazareth thinks I should drop all of this and follow him. And it's crazy. I just met this guy today. I mean, I can't go and tell my family and all of my friends that I'm just packing up and leaving to go follow this guy from town to town listening to him preach. It's crazy. And yet, I think I'm going to do it. Well, his story is more dramatic than most. People aren't called very often to drop their whole life and do a completely different thing. But the call to follow purpose over comfort is something we're all asked to consider and weigh. And in some small measure, we probably every day have to deal with some question of whether we are going to move closer or further away from the purpose to which we were called. I know a guy who built a heck of a business manufacturing and selling plastic trays, the kind you take with your Happy Meal and sit down, the ones you beat on the trash can at Hardee's, right? Built an incredible business selling plastic trays. He was very successful. He did not ask the Hollingsworth question, can we afford it this month? This guy was set. But he was also incomplete. And a few years back, he went to his pastor, made an appointment, sat down with his pastor and said, for the first half of my career, I made plastic trays. For the second half, I would like to make a difference. A call to comfort or to purpose. A graduate of the McAfee School of Theology, where I used to teach, took his first church at a small church in Florida, coastal church, tiny. A woman in that church got sick, and the church did what the church does. The church was the church. They cared for her. They went and looked after her when they got off of work. They took soup by her house. She had one sibling, a very successful brother who cared a lot about her. He would every now and then, as often as he could, clear the day of the calendar. He would fly out early in the morning, go visit his sister, fly home that night. Every time he went to see his sister, at home or in the hospital, somebody from the church was sitting with her. Somebody who cared for her and loved her was at her side on every trip, After her funeral, he made one more trip back to the small coastal town in Florida. He had made an appointment with the pastor, and he handed over a $1 million check and said, I want this to be used for everybody possible to know the love and care my sister got here. Which means he had left his nets and decided that the man from Nazareth represented something more true than he was living for at the time. Last week, I heard another great story about another Florida pastor. This pastor had finished seminary. He'd gone to his first church, and after 6 months, it went badly. The church split. He and his wife moved back to their hometown in Tallahassee. He got a job at the Capitol there in Tallahassee, and a little while later started a Bible study. Just 2, 3, then maybe 4 families got involved in this Bible study. But after a while, they said to him, would you be our pastor? Could we form a church and you be our pastor? And he said, yeah, I'll do that. But what he didn't do was tell them that he thought to be their pastor, he ought to give everything he had to it. So he quit his job at the Capitol and gave his full-time attention to being their pastor. On what little savings they had, he was running through that. When they finally found out that he was doing this full-time, and the 3 or 4 families put together whatever little offering they could put to support him. Well, he went downtown in the middle of this, went downtown to the Capitol to file the paperwork to get the church incorporated. And when he went into the Capitol building, he walked down a hall, and down one corridor was where his old job used to be. And down the other corridor was the place he would file the paperwork for incorporation. But right in the middle, he met up with a bunch of old guys from work, his buddies from when he used to work at the Capitol. He told them what he was doing, and they begged him to come back to work. In fact, they said, there is a position open. It's just the kind of thing you're good at. We'll all go in. We'll tell them you're the one to hire. We'd love to have you back. We would love to have you back. Well, 2 roads diverged in a Capitol. And this literal crossroad became a key moment in his spiritual life, because he could either walk down one hall and apply and get his old job back, go that direction of comfort, or he could walk down another hall, incorporate the church, and move toward his purpose. So at that moment, he had to decide if he was going to take the security of a job he knew and had been successful, or whether to follow God in an unknown journey that from all human measures was destined to fail. The Florida pastor is T.J. Boyle's daddy. And T.J. said, for as long as I can remember, being a pastor was my dad's only job. My mom never worked outside the home, and I have no idea how they supported a family of 4 in that situation, but that's kind of the point. Apparently, Robert Frost was right about the one less traveled. James got up the next morning. He mustered up the courage and went to talk to his family. He said, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm leaving. I've packed one bag. I'm headed to the docks to meet the Nazarene and the others who are going with us. And I love you and I love my life here, but there is something more true. I don't understand it yet, but the man they call Jesus is speaking of something bigger, something more lovely, something more satisfying than catching fish and buying boats. And I won't be satisfied until I see this one out. I'm going with him. And in the months that passed, his dreams came true. His instincts were confirmed. With each passing healing and teaching and encounter with officials, he became more and more convinced that he was following the truth, that he was giving himself to something more perfect, more beautiful, more true than he could ever imagine. And he followed him, and you heard him say things like, but I say to you, love your enemies, do good to those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you. For whoever would leave his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake, he will save it. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits his life? Every truth, every teaching, every healing only confirmed that this is the Christ. This is the fullness of God. His way, his teaching, his model of forgiveness. It's the only way. The only way to live life fully is to live for something bigger than yourself. And every time life offers choice between comfort and purpose, choose purpose. James never looked back. Every day since he put down the nets, he lived into that life of purpose and abundance. He saw demons cast out, blind men made to see, and lives set free. And then one day, on one day with the great adventure with the miracle worker, Jesus was taken before Pilate, accused, taken to the chief priest, nailed to a cross, and killed. And just that fast, in just a few hours, it all unraveled. And James was there. He heard Jesus say, "It is finished," and like a snap, everything had gone dark. Now, there were rumors that some of the women had gone to the tomb and found it empty. But who in their right mind would believe a guy just got up from the dead? And so finally, we get to today's text. At the very end of Luke's gospel, James and the others are gathered at the dreary end of their adventure. And Jesus shows up. They're startled and frightened, and they thought they saw a ghost, and Jesus tries to calm them, saying, "Why are you troubled? Why do questions arise in your heart? Look at my hands and my feet. It's me. Touch me and see. It's me in the flesh, not a ghost. And by the way, what's a guy got to do to get some lunch around here?" And he sits and eats broiled fish just like old times. And he teaches them again, and he reminds them of what the prophets were talking about. And now the game is back on. But now it's backed by the unbelievable power of the resurrection. And all of James's hopes are remarkably fulfilled. Life has renewed purpose. He hears the charge given to him by the resurrected giver of life. Repentance and forgiveness of sins should be preached in my name to all nations, beginning in Jerusalem. You are witness of these things. And James has been a witness of all of these things. He left every selfish pursuit to follow the one who forgives sins, the one who brings abundant life to everyone who believes. And he started in Jerusalem, and he started to tell everybody. He told everybody, when two roads diverge in a wood, you choose purpose. You choose to live for Christ. You choose to bear witness to the resurrection. Choose to give your life to something bigger than you are. Choose to be part of what God is doing in this world. And that day, many years ago, when James and Sid were cleaning fish, James heard the call of Christ to follow him, and he went. Sid stayed and caught more fish. And who knows, he might have ended up with his own boat. He might have ended up with 3. I don't know. But those things don't get remembered, do they? James said yes to living for something big enough that it would outlive him. And then he took the challenge of Jesus and decided to go preach and teach and tell others. And those people told people who told people who told people who told people, and one of them eventually told me. And now it's my privilege to tell you that you do not have to make a life out of making plastic trays. You can choose to make a difference. You are witnesses to these things too. And you can make a difference in the world if you choose purpose over comfort. But everybody's choice is different. So when we get to this place of response and decision, the question is, what does that choice look like for you? What would it look like for you to take one clear step toward your purpose in what God is calling you to do in the world? Would you consider that as we stand and sing?